My name is Mike Crittenden. I'm a fairly ordinary person from upstate New York, and I have a suggestion for how to improve our government, which I thought I would send out for others to consider. I propose that we create a new, non-political, un-buyable institution outside of the three traditional branches of government, with the power to overrule Congress and the President. This would require a constitutional amendment, which would look something like this. You might want to pause the video. There are 2 pages. First, I would like to say that compared to many places today, and most times in history, we actually have a pretty good government. Compared to being ruled by Vlad the Impaler, our issues are actually kind of small. But call me a perfectionist. I'd like them even smaller. I certainly don't want them to grow. And I'm not alone. Last year's election was very anti-establishment, but I don't think our problems can be fixed by electing a particular candidate or by focusing on particular issues. Many issues are symptoms rather than the underlying disease, and the latest candidate is usually just another fad cure. The underlying problem is that a modern election needs a huge advertising budget and a well-oiled political organization. Making sure they have those things for the next election colors the judgment of our leaders. They need the money, they need the party, and that's an inherent flaw in the system. Anyone you vote for will be subject to those same constraints. So the anti-establishment candidate I support is you, or somebody a lot like you, and a bunch of other people who are different in various ways. Let's put them all together in a big room and ask them what they think. The only ones you can count on to take the side of ordinary people are ordinary people.
Section 1 describes the body. I called them referees, which is not just a sports term. Scientific research, for example, is reviewed by referees before any respectable journal will publish it. A large number of people chosen at random would have all the characteristics of our population as a whole, a small-scale replica of the American people. Recent polls show that, including independents leaning that way, around 40 or 45% of us are effectively Democrats, and almost as many of us are effectively Republicans. So both parties fall short of a majority, and neither would control this body, at least for the foreseeable future. Campaign contributions and the votes some special interests can deliver would have no effect on people who are not elected and will not get another term. New people are brought in for a quarter of the body at a time, so that 3/4 of the members always have some experience which they can share. Service may be a hardship for some people. Sometimes we have to sacrifice. Over 1 million people have died serving our country in its wars. Compared to getting killed, this doesn't seem like so much to ask. I put the Chief Justice in charge where someone needs to oversee things because that's a fairly independent position which is not affected by any of this. The rest is about rules. The rules will be important. How to determine which cases are brought before the referees, who gets to present arguments, whether the voting is public or secret. I'd go with secret myself. But the Constitution is kept brief and general, so the amendment doesn't get into that. For the pay rate, what I meant by in most cases is that getting called could cost a very high-income person millions of dollars. Covering that is too much. But most of the rest of us would not suffer due to our absence from our jobs or from travel and living expenses. Section 2 says the referees can get rid of laws or rules. I was uneasy, though, with doing that with a 251 to 249 vote. You could get some arbitrary decisions that way. The people who write these things do tend to know what they're doing, so the case for overruling them should be fairly compelling. A 55% vote settles the matter because that's a very clear majority. If it passes by a closer margin, there will be a follow-up vote 6 months later, when there will be an entirely new group of referees. If they agree with the original vote, now we've made sure. This would complement the role of the Supreme Court. The referees would amount to a big jury, and both sides of a dispute would be presented to it as in a trial. The Supreme Court can strike down a law for being unconstitutional, but lawmakers are usually careful not to be unconstitutional in the first place. In a similar way, the referees will be able to strike down a law for being contrary to the people's will, or to be precise, what the people's will would be if they heard both sides unfiltered by their favorite news outlet. Hopefully lawmakers would become careful about that too. We can't do that. We'd never get it past the referees. Section 3 says the government's inactions will be refereed as well as its actions. This could provide a way for grassroots initiatives to be taken seriously. It's also possible that people with no political careers to damage might take the lead on some of those tough decisions Congress likes to kick down the road. I also picture it being used in conjunction with Section 2. Many times it would be a bad idea to nullify a law or rule and then just walk away. Much better if the referees also said what they wanted instead. For example, the referees might nullify a law which has been peppered with pork barrel projects. After nullifying it, they could then approve a version with the pork stripped off and send it back to Congress. The likelihood of the referees' initiatives actually being enacted probably depends on how large of a majority they get. If something passes with a 2/3 or 3/4 majority, ignoring it would be very difficult politically. It might also invite retribution from the referees, which brings us to Section 4. In many other countries, such as the United Kingdom, elections can be called by a vote of no confidence. Some of our states allow recall elections. I think something like that would be a useful tool for the referees. For example, say Congress got into one of these spats where they're saying to each other, the government will shut down and it'll be your fault. No, it'll be your fault. No, your fault. Yours, yours, yours. The referees could say to those responsible, probably the leadership of both parties, you and you and you and you. We're going to vote on special elections for you next week. You really want to have this shutdown worked out by then. Incumbents usually get reelected, but that's without a black eye from the referees. I'm guessing they would end the shutdown rather than chance it. I made it a 2/3 majority because that's what we have now for impeachment.
If you're a Republican, you wanted something like this a few years ago. If you're a Democrat, you want it now. Since before I was born, there has been only once that the same party held the White House for more than 8 years. Congress goes back and forth as well. No matter which side you're on, it only takes a few years until the other side has the ball. Do you really want them running around the field with it with no referees? Will these referees always make decisions I think are good? No, not at all. But here's the thing. Sometimes I'm wrong. And even when I'm not, democracy isn't about always getting your own way. Sometimes it's about gracefully bowing to the will of the majority. Their work won't be perfect, just better than what we get now. Counter-arguments. Some might say the Constitution has worked pretty well for 230 years. Should we perform a radical experiment on it just because of some problems we could handle in other ways? Well, if we were going to handle them in other ways, we would have by now. Also, This is not the most radical thing that's ever been done to the Constitution. In fact, as long as the government does things we think are reasonable, this is no change at all. When the results don't need nullification, everything works just as it does now. As for being an experiment, that's true. This might not fix anything, but doing nothing definitely won't fix anything. If someday this seems like a bad idea, it can be repealed like the 18th Amendment prohibition was. People are comfortable with what's familiar. Change is uncomfortable. But ask yourself how comfortable you really are with the present situation. This is only a crazy idea if you dismiss it as a crazy idea. If enough people see it as a serious possibility, it will become one. What has made America and other countries blossom over the last few centuries is the idea that power should be as dispersed as is practical. Political authority used to be concentrated in a king and religious authority in an official church, and things stagnated. Our Constitution dispersed that across multiple institutions and the people themselves. That dispersal, with its checks and balances, is the core concept of our Constitution. I see this amendment's additional dispersal of power as being true to that core concept and an antidote to how power has been starting to accumulate in a fairly small number of hands. The movements and protests calling attention to the problem are important first steps, but are also the easy part. A solution is trickier. This is my attempt. I imagine the details could benefit from other people's input. There are probably things I overlooked. But if you think something along these general lines would help our situation, forward this video to people who will hopefully forward it to others. And if enough of us make enough noise, that's a start toward getting it ratified. It won't be easy. Getting this through Congress would be sort of like getting the foxes to approve a new security system for the chicken house. But what seemed like long shots have come through before. A bunch of men did eventually give the vote to women, for example. So think it over. Either decide this deserves to join the other possible amendments gathering dust on the internet, or that it does not. And if it does not, decide what you're going to do about it. Thanks for listening.